Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have my July wrap-up. At the time of filming, it is July 31st. I'm about halfway through one book, so I probably will finish it today and get to 31 books read. Yes, there are 31 days in July, and I've read a book a day. Not exactly a book a day spaced out like that, but the equivalent of it. Unfortunately, I didn't have a single 5-star read this month. I had several 4.5 stars, but no 5-star reads, interestingly enough. That being said, I am going to start to change up how I do my wrap-ups, but only a little bit. I'm still going to go through the statistics, check in on my different challenges, and then instead of even shortening it to a sentence or two about every book, I'm instead going to go over all the books that got the different ratings and then talk about my least favorite of the month and my favorite of the month, which this month is going to be a 4.5-star read. So let's get into those statistics. Moving over for space, as you can see, at this time of filming, 30 books read. I read a lot of books last week. With a total of 11,670 pages, that does include books that were read as audiobooks translated into pages, for an average pages per day of 376 and average pages per book of 389, which that's on the high side of average. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I read this month, that definitely bumped up the average. Then we get to the most read genre. Up until very recently, this past week, it was not fantasy. As you will see a little bit later, fantasy beat out contemporary by only one book. I've read 19 books with Rip, not as good as previous months, and only 11 of these authors have I read from before. I'll be back in just a moment. I've got to change the battery. Okay, the angle may have changed a little bit. Obviously, had to change the battery. Now into the star rating breakdown. I had 8 4.5-star reads. That's really high. None of them quite made the 5-star range, which is okay. Then you look at the fact that I had 12 4-star reads. So I have a fairly high average, even though I didn't have any 5 stars this month. I also had 5 3.5 stars, 2 3 stars, and 2 2.5 stars. I also had 2 DNFs, which that's a step in the right direction for me, I think. I'll talk more about those in a moment. When we get into the format breakdown, half of them I read physically, half of them I read via audiobook. One was mixed media because I transitioned about 75% of the way through to reading it physically. I'd read most of it via audiobook. And 3 of them, all arcs, were ebook. Now, series started. So I'm going to talk just briefly about those. I have to find those and pull those up. Okay, as I look at this, I don't know what the 4th series that I started was. It may be a book that I had to return to the library or an arc that I don't have physically that I'm just not thinking of. The series that I started, the intentional series started, is the Licanius trilogy with The Shadow of What Was Lost. I also, with my BookBox books, started One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. And then I also started The Sword Defiant by Gareth Hanrahan. This counted for 2 different book boxes. As far as series continued, technically, one of the series that I finished, 2 of the books were continuations. And I'm not really sure what the 3rd one was. As far as series completed, I did mark a couple that I don't know if there are going to be subsequent installments in these series. As of now, they seem fully published. One of those is the Kiki Kalira Conquers a Curse. I don't think there are going to be any more in this world. There might be, but for now I'm counting this as a series finished. The other one is School Trip by Jerry Craft. There may be more in the series. I don't know if there's going to be because now the main character is going into high school, so I'm counting that as a series finished. The other series that I finished, we have Lou to finish off the track series. We have Tristan Strong Keeps Punching by Kwame Mbalia to finish off the Tristan Strong series. And we have Deathless Divide to finish off the Dread Nation duology. So I did pretty good with finishing off series because I legit finished one more series than I started. I will take that. As far as how I acquired them, because I finished my TBR a little bit sooner than I expected, pretty good thing, I did have time to get in 4 arcs. Technically, one of them I read at the beginning of the month, and that was School Trip by Jerry Craft, because I checked that out via Libby from my library and had to get that in and before it took it back. And then the other 3 I read at the end of the month. Those 3 were Shinji Takashi, Into the Heart of the Storm. It's a little bit difficult to say. The Me Too Effect, and also I Swear by Katie Porter. I also DNF'd. One of my 2 DNFs this month was an arc, but I got to 50%, so I did leave a review on NetGalley, so I left 5 more reviews on NetGalley this month. 7 of these books I got from the library. Pretty sure that, because I have only 6 here, pretty sure the other one was also an SCASL book, because those tend to be the only ones that I'm getting from the library right about now. NetGalley, oh, interesting. So I could, technically, I have it as, you see 4 arcs. I could say NetGalley because these were all from NetGalley. I might need to combine that. Owned books, 19 of them are owned books. I'm getting through this massive owned TBR. And the audiobooks, this, yes, I did listen to on Audible because it's an Audible exclusive. Don't really like that, but it is what it is. And then the rest were through various different audiobook apps that I have. All right, as far as genre breakdown, I had a lot of different genres this month. I had 8 contemporary. Most of those were my SCASL books or the Trek series by Jason Reynolds. I had 1 history book, 9 fantasy books, so only 1 more than contemporary. I had 4 historical fiction. I did count Deathless Divide as historical fiction. That's an odd one to categorize for me. If I picked another category, it could be sci-fi. You could make an argument for fantasy. I really wouldn't. I had 1 mythology. That was one of my book box books. I had 2 other nonfictions beside the history and the memoir that you'll see later, and I had 4 science fiction. So this might be my broadest genre month. So when we talk about my challenges so far this year, clearing off the oldest TBR, I did attempt a book. I don't count it as a DNF because I decided not to read it after reading the preface. I don't really even count that as starting. And that is the last of the Sandra Day O'Connor books. Nope, not going to do that. So I made progress on that one. Then when we come to Buzzwordathon, this is one of the books that I DNF'd. So I'm counting it because I read over 50%. This wasn't a bad book. I just was not into it at all. Then we come to my 23 and 23 books. I do not have a physical copy of one because I've lent it out to my mom, who's really enjoying it as well. That is Schoolhouse Burning by Derek Black. And the other one, the longest, I believe the longest on my 23 and 23 list, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I enjoyed way more than I thought I was going to. So this was definitely a hit. I talked about the series that I started, and I also talked about arcs. Now, as far as other projects, SCASL books. I believe I read 7 of them this month, but I have only 6. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the 6 that I did read this month. Most recently, I read Project Hail Mary. Then we have one that was a strong success, An Occasionally Happy Family, Ahmed Aziz's Epic Year, The Cost of Knowing, Lines of Courage, Enduring Freedom. As I sit here and think about this, I think I was a little disingenuous about some of these. I think I'm just saving them up for my next SCASL book because pretty sure I listened to this on my trip, but these are the SCASL books that I have over here. We'll just count them. I read them recently-ish working on a project. Now we get to my book box books. So we have The Sword Defiant. This particular edition I got in my Caffeine and Legends subscription that I meant to skip. However, I'm also counting it for Inkstone. This will be Inkstone's first appearance because they are a quarterly subscription and this is the only book that I have from them thus far. We have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig for Fairy Loot YA, although I would technically count this as new adult-ish, potentially on the older end of YA. Then we have In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune for Fairy Loot Adult. We have Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle for Goldsboro. We have The Whispering Dark for Illumicrate. We have Thieves by Lucy Byron for comics. We have Ithaca by Claire North for Aardvark. We have Rise by a vast number of different people for TBR, Tailored Book Recommendations. And we have Hester for Book of the Month. Now, I will be back in just a moment to go over what I rated each of these books and then to talk about the worst or most disappointing book of the month and the best book of the month. All right, so here we go. In order of least to best, starting with the one book that I did not rate this month, and that is I Swear Government is, or Politics is Messier Than My Minivan. FYI, for those that I don't have physically, I'm not going to pop up an image in this just because I'm going by too quickly. Then we have my 2.5 star reads. The first of those is Thieves by Lucy Byron and A Fourth Wing. Not going to say anything else there. Now we move to my 3-star reads. I had 2 of those. I have Enduring Freedom by Jawad Arash and Trent Reedy and Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Now we move to my 3.5 star reads. I had 1 arc, Shinji Takahashi, Into the Eye of the Storm. Have Ahmed Aziz's Epic Year. Ithaca by Claire North. Unfortunately, The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. And The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew. Now we move into the best books that I read this month, and it is by far over half, which is not too shabby, and we're going to start with the 4-star reads. I have 3 of those that I do not have physically. I have Schoolhouse Burning by Derek Black. I have Across the Desert by Dusty Bowling. And I have The Me Too Effect by Lee Gilmore. Then I have The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. Rise by a variety of authors. Hester by Lori Albanese. Kiki Kildera Conquers a Curse by Sangu Mandana. Bettina and Lou by Jason Reynolds. Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. And finally, of my 4-star reads, we have Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle. Now on to my 4.5 star reads. I started the month off with one of those with School Trip by Jerry Craft. Lines of Courage by Jennifer Nielsen. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark. Tristan Strong Keeps Punching by Kwame Ambalia. Sunny by Jason Reynolds. The Sword Defiant by Gareth Hanrahan. In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. And An Occasionally Happy Family by Cliff Burke. Now we get into the best and the least. One of these I do not have physically. One of these, obviously, I do have physically. I was going to go with a different one of the 2.5 star reads because I could choose the DNFs. Technically, in The Hunger of Thorns, that was a really, really bad book, and I didn't finish it because it was bad. But for Stealing Thunder, I didn't DNF it because it was bad. I thought it was fairly well written. I just wasn't into it. So I decided not to go for either of those. I had 2.5 star reads, if you remember. I have Thieves, the graphic novel by Lucy Byron, which is translated from the French. So perhaps that was part of the reason why. Sorry about the abrupt change there. My books decided to start sliding over from the stack. But anyway, Thieves, it might have been a translation issue. I'm not going to go with that one. So the other 2.5 star read that I have this month is Fourth Wing. You either are part of the vast majority that adore this book, find no problem with it, rate it 5 stars, several 100,000 people, at least a couple 100,000 people. I don't understand why. This is not a bad book in the sense that In the Hunger of Thorns was. In the Hunger of Thorns was very weird and there were a lot of problems with it. Fourth Wing, I can pick out some things that I understand why people like it. But structurally, it's not a great book. For someone like me, who's very logic-based, which you wouldn't necessarily get because I read so much fantasy, but I think that's why I gravitate towards those fantasy writers really build out the world, and a world that makes sense when you factor in the differences in the world, the fantastical parts of it. And when an author does not do that, I don't like those. And I think that's one of my biggest issues with Fourth Wing. The world makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. In just about every negative review that you can find of Fourth Wing, that is one of the biggest complaints. The world makes no sense. The War College makes no sense. An additional problem that I have is the representation of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I don't think I pronounced that right, but I read a book at the beginning of this year, a middle grade book, which was an Own Voices book where the character had EDS, had this Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Knowing what I know, based on that book and how that was represented, the fact that Rebecca Yarros put this disability, gave this disability to her main character, and then how it was portrayed, I don't think that was good rep. I think it was to have rep for the sake of having rep. Do not like it. The plot, there was at least one time where, and I don't think I talked about this in my review, this whole deal is that there was a rebellion about 15 or so years before, I don't even remember. And as punishment, all of those kids are conscripted into the dragon riding quadrant, which is very risky. Basically on the idea that they're probably going to end up dying. That's established towards the beginning in one of those ridiculous info dump things that Violet has at the beginning. About 60 or so % through the book, there's either a revelation or someone's talking about like, why would they do that? And I'm like, wait a second. You already established that. You've already made it clear multiple times why these children end up in the dragon riding quadrant. Even if that doesn't make sense, you've already established it in your world. And then you have a character who has questions about that later on? Wait, what? No. Logic is not there. The romance, no. I'm not going to go on more about this book. I read it because I knew it would come up on the Goodreads Choice Awards list. I don't know why I subjected myself to that, because I have opted out of books previously, but I thought, okay, I'll give it a chance. Plus, it just randomly came up on audio for me. The sequel is coming out at the very beginning of November, already has a massively high rating. I have almost no doubt that both of those books are going to be on the Goodreads Choice Awards list. There's nothing in me that is going to attempt to read Iron Flame. Nope. So that was my worst book of the month. My best book of the month. And I'm going based on vibes and enjoyment for this because I had 8 4.5-star reads. And I don't know for sure, but I think this was the highest of those 4.5-star reads in The Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. This was an almost perfect book for me. I'm not going to talk about the negative that brought it down just a little bit. That was a choice that TJ Klune made that a different author probably would have done something different to. But I found my new favorite character with Rambo in this book. I love the relationship between Rambo and Nurse Ratched. I love all of the different allusions. I love how this is a retelling of Pinocchio, but also weaving in a few other things, like I think Wizard of Oz and one other thing. And the relationships that are built in here are phenomenal. That was the biggest thing for me. The character building. If the character building is super solid and makes you feel like these are real people, even though only one of them in here is an actual human. The rest are robots of various kinds. That's going to be a winner for me. And the big point of this book is, what does it mean to be human? And I just said, there's only one human in this book. The robots. But TJ Klune paints such a beautiful picture of what does it mean to be human. And so obviously, this has to be my best book of the month. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.